Every now and then, you just gotta get in the car and go for a drive. Perhaps a long drive even. And while you're at it, you may as well see what kind of treasures can be found to pick up after spending way too much time looking around the internet. Okay, I admit, this drive is being taken with more of a purpose, and that purpose is to add to the computer collection. This day's endeavor has resulted in not one, not four, but three Dell PowerEdge 6400 7U servers in varying condition but fully loaded. They've had quite a rough life, with some mishandling and poor storage conditions. They also all smell a little like they've been in a lake. The goal was to get at least one cleaned up and running, and between the three I figured that would be quite doable. From the front, all the SCSI hard drives are still installed in their trays, and there's other drives present in the 5¼ inch bays, including a tape drive in Server 1. Server 2 got an upgrade with a SATA card and Samsung optical drive, while Server 3 has the option of 2 more hard drives added in. While I was picking these up, the previous owner was generous enough to throw in this stack of extra systems for free. I'll briefly go through these toward the end of the video. So what did this haul cost? Getting right to the point, $20 per server, $40 in gas, and a few hours of my time. I was told they were dirty, but working. What are they worth cleaned up? Looking at this review in the Network World magazine from November of 2000, the unit tested is similarly spec'd to Server 1, with less options, and was priced at a massive $32,097 each. Adjusting for inflation, that price skyrockets to roughly $57,000 in 2023. At least the performance was well rated, in 2000. Does that mean I have about $180,000 worth of equipment on my hands now? I certainly wish. But no, let's get real. These types of systems aren't really collected en masse, rather they are disposed of. Parting them out could possibly yield a good profit at what I paid for these. But that is not why I got them. My hoarding disorder just demanded more interesting Dells. Looking at these servers from here, server number 1, on the right side, looked to be the most intact and least dirty. There is no damage to the front plastic bezel, door, or clips, so I started with this beast. A bit of weight reduction was a good idea before moving this thing, as each server fully configured is about 140 pounds. Removing the trays reveals some 1.6 inch thick Seagate Cheetah Ultra 3 SCSI 10,000 RPM 73 GB hard drives. I can't say that I've had this form factor in my possession before now, and I'm sure these are going to sound pretty amazing. With the trays out, one of the prominent issues with these presents itself: rust. That will only get worse as we go through these systems. For now, the focus will be on Server 1, after wrestling it to my biggest, sturdiest workbench available. The ground, of course. Looking at the information on the inside of the cover shows a printout date of May 1998, putting these systems squarely in the late 90s to early 2000s for production and use. Around the back is the label with a manufacture date of June 21st, 2000. All of the usual ports are available, rust included, as well as an intact built and inspected by sticker. Thanks employee 13705. For power, there are 3 hefty hot swappable redundant supplies, just as dirty as everything else. Going further under the hood, we get to the good stuff. 4 beautiful golden cartridge Pentium 3 Xeon processors at 700 MHz each, front side bus of 100 MHz, and 1 MB of cache. There's also a memory riser board with a stick of 256 MB ECC registered PC 133 in each of the 16 slots. In the expansion slots are SCSI RAID cards, suggesting this unit was probably managing more hard drives than something like an external Dell PowerVault. That would have been amazing to get to if it was around. Keeping to general condition, the fans aren't looking so great, with rust on the grills and bearings in desperate need of oil. The memory board simply pulls up and out from 2 sockets on the motherboard, and every stick in all 3 servers are the same 256MB ones. This brings them to 4GB total across 4 banks, with a max capacity of 8GB if you happen to have 16 sticks of 512. At this point, I'm too afraid to mess with the plastic and metal clips holding the processors. Though the plastics have shown no signs of being brittle, thankfully. I wanted to get at least some cleaning done before I started breaking stuff, though. The processor cooling diverter shroud simply lifts up and is concealing some more nastiness. The expansion cards popped out no problem, revealing some nice Adaptec and Intel offerings with cache SIM modules. The plastic air insulator assembly pops out and lifts up easily enough, which gives us a good look at most of the motherboard now. The green expansion slots are 64-bit 66MHz PCI-X, the long white slots are 64-bit 33MHz PCI-X, and the one standard PCI is 32-bit 33MHz. Looking at the triple fan shroud shows these ones were not spared the same ravages of the others, but they're still savable. The power supplies have plastic retention and release handles, and thankfully nothing snapped when removing these modules. That sure felt like it was going to happen at least once with how firmly in place these are. There's some more terrible looking stuff on these, and I was worried the most about them when thinking about plugging in power. These 320-watt hot swap power supplies provide a max of 640 watts across the 3. They are quite heavy individually, so putting 3 in this already heavy server makes things quite difficult to manage. Recently, I went ahead and decided to purchase one of these data vac type blowers, and I am not disappointed. For the past few years, I've just turned on a loud air compressor outside, ran the line, waited for it to gain pressure, blew out what needed cleaning, then had to put it all away and drain the air tank. It gets the job done, and while this AirTech blower is loud too, it has proven to be way more convenient and time-saving than the compressor, and depending on the air nozzle used can be almost just as effective as the compressor. Now, not even the air compressor could remove all the dirt in these poor things, so some ESD brushing combined with the blower helped out quite a lot in the spaces I could reach. Everything removed got some attention too, with the power supply still being the most worrisome. Especially since while blowing out the middle unit, a friend emerged from the fan grill. I'm sure glad it did before energizing this stuff. Back to nature you go, little guy. With these units looking acceptable and the fans turning on their own, it was time to reinstall everything for a test. May as well pop in a new CMOS battery, since the isolator covers it and all. With the reassembly complete, I had to come up with something, anything, to make moving this beast around the yard better. A sheetrock cart and wood planks is what I came up with for this gravelly place. With my back being spared more lifelong affliction, I chose to create a temporary fire hazard, test setup outside. No smoke, no flames, and a beep code of 132. Not a bad outcome. The tape drive isn't happy either, so that will need attention. Looking up the beep code points to the error of no memory installed and to reseat the modules. Interesting considering there's 16 modules. Looking further into the documentation, there is a side note about this error being thrown when there are also bad modules present. That was bound to happen, and reseating them just makes sense as a first step. With all the sticks comfortably back in place, did it change anything? It sure didn't. I then stole the entire memory board from server 2 in an attempt to see if I could get lucky with that one. And... nope. Same thing. With that disappointing outcome, I took server 1's memory board inside to do some much needed deep cleaning with IPA on all of the slots, and all of the RAM contacts. Painstakingly cleaning with an ESD brush and cotton swabs. Things were looking much more clean, and it was looking good to retest. The hopes were dashed in mere seconds with more beeping of doom. So next quick things to try was to follow the troubleshooting advice from earlier and reduce the memory to the supported minimum of only 4 modules, populating bank 1. The odds were fairly decent that any bad sticks would be among the 12 removed. However, that didn't quite pan out either. It was at this point I decided bringing this inside my small workspace was going to be the best option. But to make that more feasible, the dirt had to go. A basic wipe down with cleaning solution and a towel made quick work of it. Not the deep cleaning everything needs, but at least makes handling these things a lot more pleasant. I took this opportunity to haul out server 2 in order to provide the same quick external and internal treatment. There's slightly more rust on this one, again mostly in the hard drive mounts, but nothing too major. Everything is mostly just dirty as expected. For the smoke test, the hard drives will be installed this time around. Big risk taker, I know. Luckily, or not, all that happened this time was the same beep code about the RAM. With daylight rapidly ending, server 3 had to be for the next day. And thanks to the power of video editing, the next day is now. Number 3 has seen the worst of the lot, but does come packing the most hard drives. The damaged plastics, missing door, and most dust and rust make for a comparatively worse diagnosis. A quick wipe down is still ordered up for it, and despite the rougher physical condition, it is still fully loaded just the same as the other 2. This unit sat on the floor from where I picked it up, so that means it got the brunt of the treatment. One of the power supplies has a damaged plastic release handle, which only helps reinforce server 3's fate as a spares unit. Much more debris came out of these power supplies, unsurprisingly. The inside of the system got some more blower action, revealing bits of plastic from traumas past. The rust problem everywhere is much more evident in this one, sadly. I decided I may as well get a closer look at the processors with this one, and thankfully the retention clips were still in great shape. All 4 processors came out without a problem, and upon inspection the last one is missing a heatsink screw, and shows some corrosion on the edge connector. Not too hard to see why, with this mess right up on it in the case. It is tough to show on camera, but there was also very slight corrosion on the slot too. Nothing too damaging yet, so an IPA swabbing and wipe down of all four took care of things for now. Putting it all back together with only 2 power supplies, will Smoke Test 3 finally produce results? Why yes, but not smoky or fiery ones for this system either. Instead, it was very quick to point out that, yep, there's an issue with the RAM in this too, which means there's a chance. Alright, those results are enough for me to commit to further investigation and get rolling with the next steps. I removed 2 and 3's memory boards and started in on the same tedious cleanup procedure the first one received. I figured this would still be worth trying out and only help in the long-term restoration process anyway. It was a cotton swab apocalypse, but everything came out much more clean. Once I summoned the raw strength and willpower, Server 1 was brought inside the office to finally proceed with it indoors. I dropped in Server 2's freshly cleaned memory board and powered it up. Oh yeah! I may have been too excited, but what the hell. You don't want to clean 48 sticks of RAM and 48 slots to not see a post screen. The memory test counter eventually recognized all 4 GB. It then proceeded to initialize the SCSI cards and eventually allow access to the BIOS. I knew I put that CMOS battery in this thing for a reason. At this point, I wanted to see if the same results could be had with Server 3's memory, but no such luck. Oh well, this is a great outcome either way. Switching attention to the hard drive seemed appropriate next, and of course, dirt and corrosion were more than eager to participate. A quick wipe down of these proved to be a waste of time, so removing them from the trays took priority to brush out the dust/dirt mixture caked in. The boards underneath at least looked to be in good shape. Reinstalling into the server for a test was up next, and the SCSI controllers were seeing devices, so that's a good sign. What isn't a good sign though are all the unhappy blinking LEDs. Accessing the controller handling the hard drive shows these are still in a RAID 5 array with about 280 GB of storage, and it is definitely offline. Viewing the array shows us that indeed drives 1 and 5 have committed a fail. Drive 2 just says it is ready, so I'll take that as a good indicator. I am no expert on RAID, but from what I read, having 2 or more dead drives in a RAID 5 array means the data is pretty much gone. Not a big deal to me since I erase every drive I get from e-waste anyway, but it would have been really interesting to see how this server was set up back then. Maybe one of the others will work out in this way. With that test complete, I turned my attention to the RAM and came up with something drastically easier to test with. Meet the PowerEdge 500SC, an entry-level Pentium 3 based server from 2001 I found at e-waste a couple of years ago. Yes, that is the same case Dell and other companies used for many of the beige-era towers. Black in color and with a stylized bezel. It too was neglected and suffered moisture-related damages over the course of its life, but last time I gave it power, it had no problems at all starting right up. This poor thing also needs the same attention these 6400s are getting, and that will have to be for another time. For now, I dug this out of storage for an important reason. It uses the same registered PC133 ECC memory, doesn't require 4 slots filled at a minimum, and will allow for quickly testing the 32 unknown modules currently plaguing the restoration process. A quick check of the 20-pin connector and a passed test later, the system was ready to be energized. The fan unsurprisingly sounds pretty bad, but with a good post, this thing is ready to help out. It even remembered the correct date. This was going to be a lot of powering on and off, so I took a closer look at the fan and heatsink, and the caked on garbage was not sitting too well with me. The cleaning supplies are all still out, so one moment. Some oil, soapy water, and drying later. This is a lot nicer. The ravages of nasty dust and dirt matted up for so long certainly took a toll on the heatsink. That is all flaking from corrosion. Well, the fan doesn't sound much better, but getting some more oil in it can only help. Onward to the testing. Predictably, this was a rather long and tedious task, trying out 1, 2, and 4 modules at a time. Still much easier than playing even more guessing games on the 6400's board. After some very familiar beep codes, trial and error, and memory address issues for random modules, the end results are pretty satisfying. Out of the 32 tested, 7 modules were found by this system to be bad. This means with the 16 that are currently good in Server 1, there are enough to give Server 2 another full 4 GB with spares left over. Perhaps some for the 500SC. I think it has earned it. Moving forward with the cleaning, I took each tray apart fully to perform an experiment on rust removal. Only these removable brackets are rusted with these, and I've been curious to try white vinegar as a method of rust removal. So for a test, 2 brackets took a 3-hour soak in this container, then got a scrubbing with the brass wire brush. After that, a soak in a baking soda bath was used to neutralize the vinegar. All of the mess aside, I do much prefer how they look after treatment. I read there is a possibility of flash rusting after this process, but after these 2 sat for a couple of days with minimal change, I was comfortable proceeding with this solution for the rest. For the plastic and aluminum parts, a good old soapy water scrub took care of most of the dirtiness, and removed the mildew smell entirely. The aluminum trays still have plenty of evidence of slight corrosion, but they're much better to handle now. Every hard drive also got more of a cleaning with the ESD brushes, and more wiping down with a cleaning solution. A lot more hidden dust and dirt in these things. For the 2 dead drives, I felt it worth trying to clean up contacts and examine the board underneath for any obvious problems. This probably did nothing to help, but it's still cool to look at how these are constructed further. Taking care of the fans was up next. The 2 processor fans are clipped into the plastic housing, and getting them to release took a bit of effort, and some digging around for a few more tools. These things were so nasty, just touching them turned my hands into filth. A soap scrub of the housing and manual cleaning of the fan, plus some bearing oil action, made these more than acceptable. I did mar up the plastic around the clips a little, but it's not a huge deal. The plastics overall are actually in very good shape, and are as flexible as the day they were manufactured. The rust on the fan grills was scrubbed off with a brass wire brush, and only enough to make things smooth. I'm not worried about these much since they're typical fan grills and I have replacements in a box somewhere if needed. The hard drive cooling shroud was also disgustingly dirty. The wiring inside is a little messy too, and I don't just mean from the dirt. The good condition plastics meant removing each fan was easy with no breakage of the retaining clips. What followed was mostly just boring soap scrubs, rust removal, and fan oiling. But now there are even more clean parts, including the processor air diverter shroud I also threw in the sink. After this batch of removable parts, I stopped being hesitant about the processor retention clips and removed the 4 700 MHz cartridges. They started up with the system fine, but it's definitely not a bad idea to give these a good cleaning too. A surface wipe down and IPA cotton swabbing on the edge contacts turned up even more loveliness. I may run out of cotton swabs on this project. There was no corrosion on these, unlike with Server 3, so with this done, it was time to take on the bigger stuff. Teardown of the system was pretty easy by design. The entire motherboard tray slides out toward the back in what Dell calls service mode. With all of the power and cables disconnected on the front side, the motherboard has one thumb screw to loosen, then it awkwardly comes out of the tray, sliding it away from the hook mounts. Holding it really gives a sense of how much of a monster this thing is. There is no damage on the board except for the slight rust on the VGA connector. Removing the tray fully is as simple as sliding out toward the back of the chassis. With that out of the way, direct access to the power backplane is revealed, along with the very dirty ribbon cables. The SCSI backplane comes out with a single thumb screw and slide hook mounts again. All of the 5 1/4 inch drives are next. Then the power backplane board, also with a single thumb screw. Up front, removing the front panel board also comes off with, you guessed it, another thumb screw. Over at the rust, the hard drive key comes off with 3 screws. This key and another opposite to it can be installed the other way around to accommodate either 6 1.6 inch thick drives or 8 standard 1 inch thick units. This depends on the SCSI backplane, of course, but it's really cool how versatile this is. Removing the power backplane mount could have been done with the board still installed, I just didn't realize it at the time. Really dirty in here too. To help tackle the filth still stuck to everything, it was time to deploy the crappy makeshift wash station. A hose and a soapy scrub outside didn't work miracles with this chassis, but it did make everything a lot better to the touch, and got rid of the aforementioned mildew smell from these components. Both the main chassis and the motherboard tray got this treatment, and while there isn't anything here at risk of damage, this still didn't feel quite right to do. It was, however, required to move forward. The blower put in some more work in here, helping to expedite the drying process, and remove any water hiding in tight spots. Some additional dry time outside was also not a bad idea. For the next step, one that really should have been tried before washing, I wanted to try taking out some of that nasty rust. These cheap Dremel polishing wheels probably aren't the best tool for this job, however the price for this bag made it worth a shot. Between trying out the various grit wheels and some more brass brushing, things came out pretty well. After some cleaning again, I rummaged around for a can of rust prevention spray paint and figured why not. The surface isn't really prepped right, and a painter I definitely am not, but the results here are much preferable to how it was before. At this point, I started running out of time for this project for reasons I will explain in a bit. A quick overview of the floppy and optical drives yielded the usual horribly dusty and dirty conditions. After some brushing, cleaning, and giving the head some swabbing, the floppy drive should be good to go. Server 1's SCSI CD-ROM drive wasn't looking too good. Seems like some liquid and corrosion got inside of the board, and mechanically it was very difficult to open. Plugging in power produced no signs of life, so that's not ideal. I don't have many of these 50-pin SCSI optical drives, but what I do have are two others as spares from the other servers. Out of these two, one of them behaved normally, while the other liked to make some concerning noises before just popping the tray back out. This is a gamble either way with these. Luckily, Server 2 came with a PCI SATA card, a super long cable, and that Samsung optical drive. No idea if these work either, but between these options, something has to come about from it. Sadly, the tape drive is very corroded and beyond my expertise, so it will have to sit aside for the time being. Putting things into hyperdrive, reassembly is fairly straightforward, and was a much better experience with all of these cleaned up components. It is very nice now to be able to work in this server without the filth getting everywhere. None of the boards underwent a deep cleaning, however they were in surprisingly decent condition, and only needed a light ESD brushing. With everything back in place, another power-on test was in order. With the relieving sight of seeing that post screen again, it was time to get the rest of the components in and get ready for an operating system. One of the great features of this case, and many like it, is the ability of converting it from rack to tower style with minimal changes. The 5 1/4 inch drive cage is built to allow sliding the drives in either vertically or horizontally to match the orientation. Setting the drives up this way and rotating the removable metal case badge is all that is needed to convert either way. I think this looks way better in tower mode and already love the look more before even adding the hard drives. Wait a second, I forgot about the bezel's drive faceplate. This part is just held in with clips and flips around, putting those corner pieces in the right position to hide the floppy drive's rails. Okay, now it is in tower mode. So, remember mentioning flash rust for the hard drive tray brackets? That indeed started to present itself. Luckily, it isn't very noticeable from how scarred the finish looks anyway, and it is still way better than how they were before. I wanted to give these some of the same rust preventative paint, but as mentioned before, time was running out to get this thing completed. After getting all the hard drives mounted back in their trays and reinstalled into the server, it was time for a battle with RAID. I bet you thought for a second that was going to be an ad. Judging by the status in the controller, it appears as though all that messing around brought the two problem drives back. It was very short-lived, however, and the LEDs for the trays still don't stay on either. I was going to mess with the cards, but remembered this motherboard has an onboard SCSI controller. To simplify things a little more, I moved the backplane to that. I really don't need RAID for this setup, we're just having fun here. During spin-up, the number 1 drive went back to showing signs of trouble. The scan froze at it until I removed the tray, in which a timeout error was presented. After that, the rest popped up seemingly without issue. That is all well and good, and while I do have different 73GB drives that can be used as replacements, I also have some 300GB drives that will allow for a lot more room for fun. After testing, one of these went in, and the SCSI optical drive spun up an OS installer without a problem. The SATA optical drive, though, that one was not up to the task. As for the OS, to keep things simple for my intentions, I went with Windows Server 2003. Windows 2000, NT 4.0, and Red Hat Linux also have official support from Dell. All of the hardware came supported by this server version of XP with drivers loaded for everything except the now unneeded SATA card. As expected by a 32-bit operating system, not all 4GB of RAM is being utilized, putting the total at 3.87. That is definitely more than enough for anything I intend to throw at this system, so that is just fine. Now let's do something stupid. Here is a 256MB PNY FX5200 PCI graphics card, a Creative Sound Blaster Live CT4780, and some random USB FireWire card, because why not? Yes, the purpose of this 23-year-old $30,000 server is now going to be to play games, and rather inefficiently at that. PCI-X is backwards compatible with standard PCI, but if standard PCI expansion cards are slotted in, the entire bus speed of those slots drops to 33 MHz for everything, including any present PCI-X cards. This was already happening from the SATA card, and this use case doesn't really need the higher specifications anyway. Instantly, it is revealed the FX5200 either isn't compatible or is just defective, producing no video. Okay, plan B. A 128MB GeForce 4 MX4000 it is. XP drivers installed with no problem for all the cards, which leaves server OS issues to solve. Having audio understandably isn't needed for this equipment, so going into the services and enabling Windows Audio is required for that Sound Blaster. Similarly, graphical hardware acceleration also isn't needed for a server usually. So in the graphics adapter settings, sliding the acceleration all the way to full is needed, then a quick test in DXDiag shows Direct3D is ready for action. Getting into some games, many of you may be about to comment that most games don't use more than one processor, so this 4-way setup won't be of any use and they will just be using one at 700 MHz. According to some light research, Unreal Tournament 2004 appears to support symmetric multiprocessing, or SMP, so Task Manager may have something interesting to see for this title. As for the gameplay performance itself, predictably it isn't great. Keeping everything at low settings, it both looks and plays terribly. That is okay though. I am very amused at playing UT on this hardware at all. A quick look at the graphs on Task Manager shows that indeed all 4 processors were being utilized. Very cool. The first Serious Sam was up next and it too was a bit of a struggle, still on mostly low settings. I am sure it could be tweaked into running better, but if I played this until reaching busier, larger, and enemy-heavy sections, there would be slowdowns no matter what. Again, the novelty is more than enough. Peeking at Task Manager shows only significant usage on one of the Xeons. Typical condition for games, especially from this era. I had to try flat out on here. Leaving it again at low defaults gives unplayable frame rates. Not much to be done here except crash around in near stop motion. I neglected to get an image of processor usage for this game, but it too was on only one Xeon. One of the first thoughts I had when finding these 6400s was wondering how Grand Theft Auto 3 would perform. Not really sure why, but here's how it came out. There is no consistent performance with frequent stuttering and lower frame rates, which also severely limited control. Interestingly, even with the 30 FPS limiter on, there were still many small desync issues in cutscenes and gameplay. This short test made me more thankful to my PlayStation 2 back in the day when binging this game for hours on end. Also, only one Xeon utilized, no surprises there. I also let 3D Mark 2000 have a go with all default tests. And while that is running, as mentioned earlier, I wanted to touch on why time ran out for this project, and why the other two servers aren't being showcased more. As for most of us these days, the past few years have been rough, with many negative changes being forced. In the middle of cleaning Server 1, I was put into a position of having to look for a new career and look for a new place to live, both involuntarily. It has been a frantic process of securing my possessions in a storage unit, and selling or throwing away everything that can't fit. Keeping to my convictions, the last of my furniture has already been sold or given away to make room for computers. Can't always make a throne out of towers, right? This process is ongoing at the time of posting this video, and I can't say what the future will hold right now. It is not a fun position to be in, but in the meantime, getting this server up and running has been a fun distraction, and all three will be safely locked away with the rest of the horde. Anyway, 3D Mark 2000 ran fairly well and ended with a score of 4234 marks. Hey, that's right at the Dell Inspiron 8200 I covered in a previous video. So how about that stack of the extra free systems? These were also all very dirty and suffering from their own issues, but I always find it worth trying out something that's still in one piece. The smaller tower was up first, showing off a complete build with an Asus board inside. It powered on but did nothing else. The power supply tester indicated some problems, so hooking up a known good unit was next, and suddenly it posted. Just a Core 2 Duo system with a corrupted Windows install. One of the bigger towers was up next, I think an Antec case, and it too is complete, also with an Asus motherboard. This time a socket 478 Pentium 4 build with some bad capacitors. It came to life on first try and began loading Windows 2000 Server. The second big tower is identical to the first, right down to powering on first try, the bad caps, and loading into Windows 2000. Lots of good parts in both. The server, a PowerEdge 2850 from 2004, was in very poor shape. There is nasty corrosion randomly throughout the components inside, and much more dirt. It looks like it has been left outside somewhere, actually. What is to lose just hooking it up and running it, though? Amazingly, it powered up with both power supplies and appeared to attempt going through post, but it never produced an image on the monitor. As much as I want it to pull through, it's really not going to be worth it with all the damages. But hey, it is loaded with more 73GB SCSI drives that may still work. Sadly, the rest of this will have to go to scrap, as much as I hate doing that. The towers I broke down for parts. One more power supply was intermittently going bad on some lines, so to be safe I chose not to keep it. In the end of this side quest, I ended up with this box of extra parts, and kept the ATX boards for a possible future recapathon. Well, with all that said and done, and with efforts to continue moving underway, this has turned out to be one of the most extensive computer projects I've undertaken yet, and it was only about 1/3 of the story. It is very unclear what the future will bring, but the mission to save the computer horde remains unchanged. And having at least one functional 6400 out of the 3 is pretty great. Well, that about does it for this video. Thanks for watching.